The Orange Unit. The Orange Unit includes the following sections: beginning sounds, end sounds, and beginning, middle, and end sounds. These sections are delineated in orange throughout the program. The Orange Unit focuses on the beginning, middle, and end sound of a word. The primary focus is on learning about beginning and end sounds of words. Middle sounds are only briefly addressed. This unit will assist students when they move on to learn about phonemes. About sounds. Sounds in this unit are written within sound marks. 2 forward slashes indicate that the teacher should say the sound of each letter and not the name of each letter. When saying the sounds within the sound marks, the teacher should take care to say the pure consonant sound or the clipped sound of the letter. The pure consonant sound is the distinct sound of a letter without a short vowel sound following it. For example, b and not b. The teacher can call the pure consonant sound the teeny-weeny sound when instructing students. Proper teacher modeling of the pure consonant sound will ensure that students will pronounce the sound correctly. If any students are having trouble with pronunciation, the teacher can model the correct way to say a sound until these students are able to articulate the sound correctly. When saying words throughout the sections of the Orange Unit, the teacher should stress each sound to ensure that students hear the sounds correctly. Some sounds can be stretched out for emphasis. These sounds are written in forward slashes with 3 dots following the last letter. Sounds that can be stretched out are f, l, m, n, r, s, sh, f, v, u, and z. Some sounds cannot be stretched out. These sounds will need to be repeated several times for emphasis. These sounds are written in forward slashes with dashes between the letters. Sounds that cannot be stretched out and that need to be repeated are b, 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 k, 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 C or K, d, 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 g, 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 p, 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 and t, t, t. In the first few lessons of the beginning sounds section and the end sounds section, the beginning or end sound of a word will be written with either dots or dashes for emphasis as illustrated above. This will ensure that students hear distinct sounds clearly. Dots will indicate that the sound should be stretched out for emphasis. For example, sun or leaf. Dashes will indicate that the sound should be repeated for emphasis. For example, p, p, pan, or pot. T. If a particular class or student would benefit from additional guidance regarding beginning and end sounds, the teacher can continue to emphasize the sounds by stretching them out or repeating them, even when this is not specified in the lesson. When students have graduated from having sounds stretched out or repeated, the teacher should still take care to articulate each sound clearly. This will ensure that students hear the correct sound. If the teacher supplements a word list when asking students to choose or compare words, it is important that any additional words used in a word group have sounds that are clearly distinguishable from each other. It may be challenging for students to differentiate between sounds that are created with similar mouth formations. Sounds with similar mouth formations include b, p, d, t, g, k, v, f. Let's begin now with the first section in the Orange Unit, the beginning sounds section. Introduction. In the beginning sounds section, students will focus on the beginning sound of a word. First, students will be introduced to the concept of a sound. Students will learn about individual sounds and how the mouth moves in different ways to produce different sounds. They will learn that sounds are put together to form words. A train will be used to teach this concept. Just as a train is made up of individual cars, a word is made up of individual sounds. Goals included in this section. Introduction to beginning sounds. Students will learn about the concept of sounds and that sounds form words. Here, students will learn that the mouth moves differently to make different sounds like f and l or m. Sounds are then put together to make words. Watch my mouth as I put together some sounds to form words. Mop, leaf, van. We can also demonstrate this concept using the idea of a train. Each car of the train represents a sound, and when we put the cars, or the sounds, together, they make a word. Students will need to learn how to identify the beginning sound in a word. So before we actually get into addressing the actual goals in this section, we need to establish that students understand the meaning of beginning and how to apply that when it comes to a word. The concept of beginning can be demonstrated with a train as well. Just like the train has a beginning, the part of the train that comes first, or the part of the train where the driver sits, a word also has a beginning, the sound that comes first. For example, in the word sock, s-ok, s is the beginning sound. Identifying the beginning sound of a word. Students will isolate and articulate the beginning sound of a word. For example, what is the beginning sound in the word sun? S-un. S is the beginning sound. Do these words begin with the same sound? Students will determine whether two words begin with the same sound. For example, do these words begin with the same sound? Lion and leaf. Yes, these words begin with the same sound. L. Gate and fan. No, these words do not begin with the same sound. Choosing the word with a specific beginning sound. Students will choose the word that begins with a specific given sound when given a choice of words. For example, which word begins with k? Cake or fish? Cake begins with the k sound. The same beginning sound as another word. Students will choose the word that begins with the same sound as a given word when given a choice of words. For example, which word begins with the same sound as duck? Donut or sock? Donut begins with the same sound as duck, d. Choosing the odd one out. Students will choose the word that does not begin with the same sound as other words in a group. For example, which word does not begin with the same sound as the others? Pizza, paint, or car? Car does not begin with the same sound as the other words. Note, there are no oral lists for odd one out, as this is a more difficult goal than the rest and may be challenging for students to accomplish orally. Generating words with a specific beginning sound. Students will suggest words that begin with a specific given sound. For example, what are some words that begin with s? Sun, sock, six, song. The same beginning sound as another word. Students will suggest words that begin with the same sound as a given word. For example, what are some words that begin with the same sound as sun? Sun, sock, six, song. Manipulatives and activities. Teacher display cards. The teacher will introduce each goal with picture cards. For example, the word lock starts with the l sound. The word kite starts with the k sound. The teacher will display the lock and kite picture cards. Train. A diagram of a train will be used to help students understand the concept of sounds and how they make up words. The first car of the train, the green car where the driver sits, will be used to represent the beginning sound of a word. For example, the word lock starts with the L sound. The word kite starts with the K sound. Worksheets and activities. Targeted worksheets and activities are provided throughout the section so that students can apply and practice each of the goals of the beginning sound section. There are different targeted activities provided for the students so they can apply and practice the goals addressed. Each of these activities is different and specific to a certain lesson. Details regarding these activities are found in the lessons themselves. Oral practice. The final step for each goal is oral practice, where students will perform each task without the help of manipulatives or visual cues. Word lists are provided at the end of each goal. The teacher will use these lists to prompt students to apply the targeted goal. This completes the beginning sound section. We will now move forward to the next section of the Orange Unit, the end sound section. End sounds. Introduction. In the end sound section, students will focus on the end sound of a word. Goals included in this section. Introduction to end sounds. Students will learn about the concept of an end sound of a word. In the same way they learned about beginning sounds in the previous section, students will now learn to identify end sounds. First, they will need to become familiar with what we mean when we say the end of a word. The idea of the train will come in handy here once again. Just as the red car is at the end of the train, the red car comes last. The end of a word is the last sound of a word. In the word man, the end sound is n. Identifying the end sound of a word. Students will isolate and articulate the end sound of a word. For example, what is the end sound of ball? L is the end sound of the word ball. Do these words end with the same sound? Students will determine whether two words end with the same sound. For example, do these words end with the same sound? Fish and brush. Yes, these words both end with the same sound, sh. Do these words end with the same sound? Cup and slide. No, these words do not end with the same sound. Choosing the word with a specific end sound. Students will choose the word that ends with a specific given sound when given a choice of words. For example, which word ends with g? Plug or hot? Plug ends with the g sound. The same end sound as another word. Students will choose the word that ends with the same sound as a given word when given a choice of words. For example, which word ends with the same sound as ball? Knife or drill? Drill ends with the same sound as ball. They both end with the l sound. Note, there are no oral lists for choosing the word with the same end sound as another word, as this task would be too challenging for students to accomplish orally. A word about end sounds. End sounds are more difficult to master than beginning sounds. Some of the goals that are addressed with beginning sounds are simply too difficult to apply to end sounds. Manipulatives and activities. Teacher display cards. The teacher will introduce each goal with picture cards. For example, as the teacher shows a picture card of a bus, they will say the word bus ends with the s sound. Note that in this example, the s sound will be extended. Displaying a picture card of a coat, the teacher will say the word coat ends with the t sound. Note that in this example, the t sound will be repeated. Train. A diagram of a train will be used to help students understand the concept of an end sound. The last car of the train, the red car, will represent the end sound of a word, and the last sound will be extended for some sounds and repeated for other sounds when the teacher says the word. For example, bus, coat, sweep and punch motion. The sweep and punch motion will be used to emphasize the end sound of a word. This will make it easy for students to identify the end sound. As the teacher says a word, the teacher and students will sweep a fist along the train. They will sweep their fists from the beginning car towards the end car, from left to right, and punch the last car of the train as they reach the last sound of the word. For example, bus, coat, run and jump motion. The run and jump motion is a variation of the sweep and punch motion above. Here, students will run as the teacher says a word and jump as they reach the end sound of the word to emphasize it. For example, bus, coat. Worksheets and activities. Targeted worksheets are provided throughout the section. There are different targeted activities provided for the students so they can apply and practice the goals addressed. Each of these activities is different and specific to a certain lesson. Details regarding these activities are found in the lessons themselves. Oral practice. The final step for each goal is oral practice, where the students will perform each task without the help of manipulatives or visual cues. Word lists are provided at the end of each goal. The teacher will use these lists to prompt students to apply the targeted goal. This completes the end sound section. We will now move forward to the final section of the orange unit, beginning, middle, and end sounds. Beginning, middle, and end sounds. Introduction. In this section, beginning, middle, and end sounds, students will focus on the beginning and end sound of a word simultaneously. Students will also be exposed to the concept of middle sounds. This section provides an excellent review of the previous sections, beginning sounds and end sounds, while bringing concepts covered in those sections to a higher level. Is this the beginning sound or the end sound of a word? Students will identify where in a word they hear a sound, in the beginning or at the end. For example, where do you hear r in the word rich? In the beginning or at the end? In the beginning. Where do you hear t in the word heat? In the beginning or at the end? At the end. For example, where do you hear the p sound in the word cup? The p sound is at the end of the word. Introduction to the middle sound of a word. Students will learn about the concept of a middle sound and identify the middle sound of a word. Students will learn that if something is in the middle, it comes between the beginning and the end. We will demonstrate this idea with the train once again. Students have seen that the green car of the train represents the beginning and that the red car of the train represents the end. Now they will learn that the yellow car occupies the middle part of the train and it represents the middle sound of a word. Is this the beginning, middle, or end sound of a word? Students will determine where in a word they hear a sound, in the beginning, the middle, or the end. For example, where do you hear the ah sound in the word cat? In the beginning, the middle, or the end? In the middle. Note, there are no oral lists provided for middle sounds since this goal is only taught briefly. Identifying the beginning or end sound of a word. Students will alternate between identifying the beginning sound or the end sound of a word. For example, what is the beginning sound of sock? S. What is the end sound of moon? N. Do these words have the same beginning or end sound? Students will determine what two words have in common, a beginning or end sound. For example, do these words have the same beginning sound or end sound? Fish and fun. These words have the same beginning sound. Cup and sheep. These words have the same end sound. Manipulatives and activities. Teacher display cards. The teacher will introduce most of the goals with picture cards. Note, this section does not have its own teacher display cards. Any teacher display cards needed for this section are from the end sounds section. Train. A train will be used for students to review beginning and end sounds. The middle car of the train, the yellow car, will be used to represent the middle sound of a word. Worksheets and activities. Targeted worksheets and activities are provided throughout the section so that students can apply and practice each of the goals of the beginning, middle, and end sound section. Each of these activities is different and specific to a certain lesson. Details regarding these activities are found in the lessons themselves. Oral practice. The final step for each goal is oral practice, where the students will perform each task without the help of manipulatives or visual cues. Word lists are provided at the end of each goal. The teacher will use these lists to prompt students to apply the targeted goal. This completes the Orange unit. Let's proceed now to the final section of the program, phonemes. Phonemes is the last section of the Red unit.